The screen is dark. A single candle flickers. Then a voice, like breath on cold glass, begins to speak. In forgotten corners of the world, where wind speaks through cracked wood and silence is heavier than stone, there are stories no one writes down. Here on FolkFear, we gather what should have stayed buried. We whisper of cursed rituals, sacred sins, and the shadows that linger where tradition dies. Tonight, we bring you one such tale, a legend not found in books, but carved into charred lanterns buried in swamp water. They called it the Lantern Burial. In a village where no fire is ever left unguarded, where the dead are not mourned but feared, they buried their dead with burning lanterns so the spirits could find their way back home. But some lights refuse to go out, and when they return burning. The flame flutters, then vanishes.
Min arrived at dusk, just as the mist began to rise. The road that led him there wasn't on any map, just a dirt trail that bled off the highway like a forgotten vein, winding through reeds and silence. He hadn't meant to take it, but something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps something older, had tugged at his hands on the wheel. Now the sun was dying behind the hills, and the trees leaned in close, as if whispering to each other above him. The village didn't have a name, at least not one displayed on any sign. The only marker was a crooked wooden post, its lettering worn smoothed by years of rain and the touch of wind. But men felt it the moment he crossed the invisible threshold. It was not the scent that shifted, though the air now smelled faintly of wax and soil, but the weight of everything, the pressure behind the eyes, the silence that did not rest. He parked the motorbike beside a rice field and walked the last stretch in. The homes were made of wood and clay, with sagging roofs that hunched like shoulders bent in prayer. No power lines ran here. The only light came from small oil lanterns placed outside each home, low to the ground like offerings to something that crawled. Min was a travel writer, though lately more of a wanderer than anything else. He had once made a name documenting villages untouched by modernity. This place, he thought, would be perfect. It was untouched, yes, but not in the way he expected. It didn't feel ancient. It felt preserved, like something held in wax, like something not allowed to decay. As he stepped deeper into the village, he noticed the stairs, not unfriendly, but unreadable. The villagers watched from behind curtains or from behind hands, heads turned only slightly toward him. None of them spoke, not a word. He passed by a group of children playing near a shrine made of stone and blackened wood. They didn't laugh, just moved slowly in circles, their hands linked, whispering something under their breath. Min paused to listen, but the sound died the moment he looked. He found lodging at a small stilt house run by a man called Ong Tan. Elderly, soft-voiced, with eyes that didn't blink enough. He gave Min a room at the back, a simple mat, a flickering lamp, and a firm warning. Never open the door after midnight, no matter what you hear, and don't touch the lanterns. Min smiled politely and thanked him, assuming it was part of some old custom. He jotted it into his notebook with a casual note: local superstition, possible ritual practice, investigate. But when night fell, Min understood something was off. The village did not sleep, Not truly. The lanterns outside the homes grew brighter, not dimmer, as the hours deepened. Their flames danced oddly, as if reacting not to wind, but to breath. From his window he saw shadows pass between houses, some tall, some far too small. He couldn't tell who they belonged to, or if they belonged to anyone still alive. Around 2 a.m., he heard it. A soft ringing, like glass being tapped. Distant at first, then closer and closer. A rhythmic chime that moved like footsteps down a path no one could see. Then came the scent. Wax, thick and hot, with a strange undertone of something burning. Min, unable to resist, crept to the floor and peeked beneath the door. Outside, the earth was glowing. Tiny lights flickered from under the soil, dozens of them, hundreds of them, as if lanterns had been buried there, and now their flames were pushing up from the dirt. It wasn't the lanterns outside the homes that frightened him. It was the ones that seemed to breathe beneath his feet. Then, the knock. 3 soft taps on the wooden door, followed by silence. Then again, tap, tap, tap. He held his breath, remembered Ongtan's warning, don't open the door. The knocking stopped. He thought it was over. But then, beneath the floorboards, something began to scrape. Not claws, not metal, something softer, like fingernails, dragging slowly from one end of the room to the other. Men pressed himself against the wall. His throat was dry, his skin was ice. He listened for minutes, long after the sound had stopped. Only then did he dare sleep, if you could call it that. Restless, half awake, with dreams of lightless corridors and lanterns that dripped blood instead of wax. The next morning, the village was silent. The children were gone. The shrine was burned. No one mentioned it. Ongtan brought breakfast with hands that trembled slightly, placing the bowl on the floor without a word. He wanted to ask about the sounds, about the lights, but when he tried, the old man shook his head. Some fire is not meant to be seen twice. And he walked away. Men stepped outside and looked to the field where he had seen the earth glow. The soil looked undisturbed, but as he passed it on his way to the shrine, something caught his eye. A small patch of dirt just beneath the foot of a tree had been turned recently. Curious, he knelt and brushed it away with his fingers. Soft earth, moist. Something peeked through. Glass. A lantern. Still warm. Still burning. The morning fog in the village never truly cleared. It only lifted high enough to reveal roofs that drooped under age and time, and faces that avoided the light. Ming walked through it like a ghost among ghosts, each step sinking softly into damp soil. The air smelled faintly of smoke and lotus, both sweet and suffocating. He wandered until he found her. The woman stood by the riverbank, staring into water that didn't move. She wore a veil of gray cloth that swayed with the breeze, but beneath it, her face was almost too still. Her eyes were dry, her lips cracked white like salt. When she turned, Ming saw no reflection behind her in the river. "You're not from here," she said. Her voice was calm, flat as stone. "No, I travel, I write, I'm a witness," she interrupted, Then write carefully." She began to walk away, slow and deliberate, and he followed without meaning to. The woman's name, he learned, was Ba Ling. They called her the widow with no shadow. She lived in a small house near the edge of the burial field, where the soil was always damp and smelled faintly of wax. Inside her home, the air was cooler. A single lantern hung above the door, unlit, wrapped in red silk. Ming noticed it immediately. Every other home in the village kept their lanterns burning day and night, but hers was bound, sealed. He asked about it. She did not answer. Instead, she poured him tea the color of river silt and sat opposite him. "You saw them last night, didn't you?" she asked. "I saw light beneath the ground." She nodded. "Then the earth has already spoken to you." Outside, a dog barked once, then whimpered, then went silent. The sound of crows echoed faintly through the mist. The widow spoke again, softer now. "Every soul here is buried with a lantern. It's how we guide them home. But the flame must die before sunrise, or it becomes something else, something that doesn't know it's dead." Ming felt a chill run down his spine. "And what happens when it doesn't go out?" Ba Ling looked toward the unlit lantern hanging above her door. "Then it comes back, burning." Her hands trembled slightly as she poured another cup of tea. Ming noticed faint scars on her wrists, thin and circular, as though bound by twine once soaked in wax. "My husband," she said after a pause, "was the first to come back." The story spilled from her lips like smoke from an old flame. Years ago, her husband drowned in the river during the harvest. The villagers performed the Lei Dien Chon, the lantern burial. They placed a glowing lantern in his hands, believing it would guide his soul to rest. But his flame never died. For 3 nights it burned beneath the soil, glowing through the earth like an ember under ash. Then he returned. She woke one night to find him standing in the doorway, his clothes dripping with mud, his eyes empty, his skin warm, not with life, but with fire. He did not speak. He only raised his hand and pointed to the lantern above their bed, whispering a single word: "Light." When she refused, the house caught fire on its own. She survived. He vanished. Since that night, she had never lit another lantern. Ming wrote every word, his hand trembling as his pen moved across the paper. The story sounded impossible, yet the grief in her tone made disbelief feel cruel. "Why does the village still do it?" he asked quietly. "If they know what happens." Her eyes hardened. "Because we are bound by fear, not faith." Then she leaned closer. "When the bell rings at midnight, do not answer it. When you see fire move where wind does not blow, do not follow it. And if a voice calls your name from under the ground, pretend you are deaf." Ming felt her breath chill the air between them. He asked her what lay beyond the burial field, the swamp he had seen from afar, glowing faintly even in daylight. She did not answer right away. She only traced a line on the wooden table with her finger, as if drawing a map she could not bear to finish. "That," she whispered, "is where the old lanterns are buried, the ones that refuse to die." Before he could ask more, something knocked on the door. Once, then twice, slow, heavy. Ba Ling went pale. Her hand moved instinctively toward the sealed lantern above the door. "It's too early," she murmured. "The sun hasn't set." The knocking continued. Ming, heart pounding, stepped toward the window. Through the crack he saw nothing but fog, yet the sound was close, too close. It came again, softer now, like knuckles dragging across wood. "Don't open it," the widow whispered. The sound stopped. For a long moment they sat frozen. Then, from beneath the floorboards came a faint, muffled whisper. Not words, just the sound of breath. The widow clutched her chest, eyes wide with fear. Ming knelt, pressing his ear to the floor. What he heard made his blood turn cold. Someone or something was whispering his name. He stumbled back, breath shaking, staring at the old woman. "You heard that?" She nodded once, tears finally breaking through the stone of her expression. "It knows you now." The sound faded, but its echo stayed. Outside, the fog began to glow faintly orange, as if firelight were spreading through it, yet no smoke followed. The widow rose slowly, gathering a small clay urn from the shelf. She placed it in her hands. It was warm. Inside, he could hear something shifting softly, like a wick burning low. "If you mean to stay," she said, "take this to the burial field before sunset, bury it deep, and whatever you see out there, do not look back." He started to speak, to ask what was inside, but she turned away. Some fires are not meant to be carried by the living. Ming stepped outside into the mist, the urn heavy in his hands. The sun was setting again, bleeding red through the haze, and there, through the trees, he saw them again. Lanterns, hundreds of them, swaying, half buried in the soil. Their flames flickered not with life, but with memory. Each one burned the same shade of sorrow. Each one whispered the same name. His. Evening in the village came without warning. The mist did not fade into twilight, it thickened into it. The air turned copper gray, and the faint hum of insects gave way to something heavier, the sound of wet cloth dragging through dirt. Ming stood at the edge of the burial field, clutching the urn the widow had given him. Its warmth had dimmed during his walk, but the faint shifting sound inside still continued, as if ashes were breathing. He could not tell if it was wind or heartbeat. The field stretched far beyond what the morning had revealed. Mounds of earth formed a sea of shallow graves, each marked not by stones, but by small lanterns half buried in the soil. The flames inside them burned faintly, yellow at the edges, blue at the heart, and each one swayed without wind. He had planned to return the urn and leave, but as the last trace of daylight sank behind the trees, a sound began to rise, the low thrum of a bell far away, not loud, not ceremonial, a single tone that bent and broke as if the metal itself were tired of ringing. Then came the procession. They emerged from the mist slowly, villagers dressed in linen the color of ash, their faces hidden behind veils of thin gauze. Each one carried a lantern cupped in both hands. The line moved without a word, only the rustle of cloth and the crackle of oil wicks breaking the silence. At first, Ming thought it was a funeral, but the air felt wrong. There was no grief in their movements, no mourning, only obedience. Each villager stopped before a mound, knelt, and placed the lantern down, whispering something so soft it was almost wind. Then, after a moment, they stood and moved to the next. Ming hid behind the roots of a banyan tree, watching. The widow had told him to bury the urn, but his curiosity chained him to the moment. He could not look away. He saw a child among them, no older than 7, his small hands wrapped around a lantern too large for his chest. The boy's face was pale, his eyes vacant. When the bell rang again, he stopped and turned toward Ming's hiding place. His lips did not move, yet Ming heard a whisper thread through the fog. "You shouldn't be here." The voice came not from the boy, but from the flame inside the lantern. Ming stumbled back, his heart hammering in his throat. The flame pulsed once and went out. The boy lowered the lantern gently to the ground, then walked into the mist and vanished. The procession continued, winding deeper into the burial field. Ming followed from a distance, drawn by the rhythmic ring of the bell. He told himself it was to understand, to document, but something in him already knew it was far more dangerous than that. At the field's center stood an altar of cracked stone. Upon it lay another body, wrapped in white cloth and bound by waxed rope. 2 villagers stood on either side, their lanterns placed near the corpse's head and feet. When the bell rang a 3rd time, they began to chant. The words were old, not Vietnamese as Ming knew it, but something older, a language shaped by breath and sorrow. The chant rose and fell, steady as the tide. Then one of them lifted the lantern and poured its oil over the shrouded body. The wick caught immediately. The fire burned low and soundless, curling like smoke under glass. Ming gasped softly. It wasn't the flame that horrified him. It was the way the body beneath the cloth began to move. The villagers did not flinch. They simply lowered their heads as the corpse's fingers twitched beneath the binding ropes. The cloth burned away slowly, revealing skin that glowed faintly orange beneath soot. He could see the ribs rise, not with breath, but with the swell of heat. The bell rang again. This time, it didn't stop. The sound fractured the air, deep and endless, echoing inside Ming's skull. He pressed his hands to his ears, but it only grew louder. The flyer flared, and from the corpse's mouth, something black and shimmering spilled forth, writhing like smoke given weight. The villagers whispered as one, "Guide him home." They lifted their lanterns and began to walk away. Each step they took drew the flame from the body, small tendrils of light rising from its chest, coiling into their lanterns like threads of stolen breath. Ming watched, frozen. When the last lantern was filled, the fire around the body died instantly. What remained was not ash, but wax, a perfect human shape molded in pale candle material, still warm to the touch. The villagers departed, leaving the wax corpse behind. When he waited until the last lantern light vanished into the fog before he approached, the body smelled faintly of honey and smoke. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed his fingers against its arm. The surface was soft, pliable, and beneath it, faintly, something moved. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the urn. The sound inside it, that soft shifting, grew faster, louder. He turned toward the swamp path, desperate to leave, when a hand, waxen and cracked, reached out from the ground beside him and seized his ankle. Ming screamed and kicked free, stumbling backward into the fog. The hand melted away into the earth, leaving only the scent of burning oil. He didn't stop running until the burial field was far behind him. The bell had fallen silent. The night was thick again. Only the glow of the urn in his hands remained, pulsing softly with each of his breaths. He collapsed beneath a tree, gasping. The urn had cracked slightly. A thin line of light leaked through it, a sickly orange that flickered like a candle's last breath. And within it came a sound, faint but clear, a heartbeat. When Ming returned to the village at dawn, no one acknowledged him. The streets were empty. The children were gone again. He walked past the shrine, past the river, until he reached the widow's home. Her door was open, her red-wrapped lantern missing. Inside, the walls were covered in black soot, as though a fire had started and stopped halfway. In the center of the room sat the widow, still, pale, A single lantern burned beside her, the same red silk now gone, its flame bright and hungry. She looked up at him slowly, her eyes hollow yet full of knowing. "You watched them, didn't you? You shouldn't have." The urn in Ming's hands pulsed once more, then cracked open entirely. A tiny flame crawled out and drifted toward the ceiling, forming a shape, the faint outline of a child holding a lantern, the same boy from the burial field. The widow screamed. The flame burst. The light died. When the darkness settled again, the boy was gone. The lantern was empty. But the widow's shadow, which had never returned, now flickered faintly on the wall, and behind it was another.
Sleep became a stranger to Min. Each time he closed his eyes, he felt the weight of unseen things pressing down, not on his chest, but on the floor beneath him, as if something moved in the wood, as if something breathed in the cracks between the boards. His dreams burned hot with the image of the wax boy rising from the urn, his empty eyes glowing with the same fire that devoured the widow's shadow. But what haunted Min most was not the boy's flame. It was the sound. Every night, just after midnight, he began to hear it. Drip, drip, drip. Not water, not rain, wax. It echoed from nowhere and yet always near. He searched the ceiling, the corners, the windowsill. No candles, no melting oil, but the sound remained, slow and cruel, like time bleeding through silence. By the third night, Min began sleeping with the lantern lit, a small one he had borrowed from Ung Tun, though the old man gave it with trembling hands and warned him not to keep it near the floor. "It calls to them," he muttered, "the light that sinks." Min barely listened. He was unraveling. His notes had grown erratic, whole pages filled with scrawled drawings of flame-wreathed children, of urns split down the middle like skulls, of lanterns buried in graves shaped like mouths. He wandered the village by day, searching for someone, anyone who would acknowledge what he'd seen. But the villagers had grown quieter, their movements more desperate. Lanterns now hung not just outside homes, but from trees, fence posts, and even over wells. One morning, Min found a row of fresh lanterns floating in the irrigation canal, each one tied to a stone. As he watched, one of them flickered violently, then hissed as it sank into the water. The ripples didn't fade. They grew wider and wider, until something slick and dark broke the surface. A pale face, no eyes, no mouth, just wax. He ran. He didn't stop until he reached the widow's home. But she was no longer there. Her door remained open. Her lantern, once missing, now hung from a string of black thread, swaying even though there was no breeze. He entered cautiously. The room smelled of ash and flowers, the scent of burned offerings. A single sheet of parchment lay on her table, folded once. He opened it. Inside was a drawing, a map, crude but clear. It led to the swamp. In the corner of the page, written in delicate brushstrokes, were 4 words: "Where fire cannot float." That night, Min lit the small lantern again and sat by the window. He kept his notebook closed. He didn't write. He only listened. The dripping had changed. It now sounded like it came from inside the walls. And when the bell rang, that dull, bone-heavy note, something whispered beneath it. A voice, layered and broken. Not one, many. Sink it, bury the flame before it breathes again. Min stood up and walked to the floorboards. He pressed his ear to the ground. Nothing. Then, scratch. Soft, gentle, like the scraping of fingers across wax. Then a whisper, just one word. Cold. He shot upright, his breath caught. The lantern on his table flickered, then dimmed, as if exhaling. Then came the worst sound of all, a heartbeat, faint but from below. Min ran outside into the cold night air. The fog was thick again, but not the clean gray of morning. This fog burned orange at the edges. The village looked like it had been dipped in firelight, but there was no fire, no smoke, only glow, and dripping everywhere now. From roofs, from branches, from the eyes of stone statues that lined the shrine road. He made his way to the burial field. He didn't think, he didn't speak. He only followed the path the widow had left, the winding marks that curved through his mind like old scars. The swamp was waiting. It was not like he remembered. By day it was still and green. At night it was black and endless. The water didn't reflect the sky. It reflected flame. Lanterns floated everywhere, and yet the air was cold. He walked to the edge. The ground squelched beneath his feet, thick with mud and some darker sludge that clung to his shoes. He held the cracked urn from the night of the procession. He'd carried it with him like guilt. The glow inside had returned, dim but alive. He stepped into the water, just once. It was freezing. But something moved below the surface. Lanterns, not floating, but tethered. Hundreds of them, tied to bodies. Their light pulsed faintly from the mouths of drowned men, from eye sockets where coin offerings should have gone. One rose as he watched, a corpse still wrapped in burial cloth, but the cloth burned slowly, eternally, like it was soaked in oil. The face beneath had no flesh, just wax. It raised its hand, reached for Min. He stumbled back, fell, dropped the urn. It cracked again. From the split, light poured out, not just light, but heat. And a voice. You carry what should have been sealed. The corpse moved closer. The other lanterns flickered wildly. The swamp churned. Hands rose, not to grasp, to guide him into the water. But just as they reached him, the bell rang. A clear silver tone, not from the village, from beneath the swamp. All motion stopped. The corpse froze, the lanterns dimmed, the water fell still, and then, like breath exhaled by the dead, they all sank. Lanterns, bodies, flame, down, into the black, gone. Min was alone again. He crawled from the mud, clothes soaked, skin freezing, heart pounding like a drum. The urn still glowed beside him, but the light inside was no longer restless. It was waiting. He took it in his hands and whispered, I don't know what you are, but I will not carry you forever. Then, from behind him, soft footsteps. He turned. A boy stood at the edge of the water. Same pale skin, same burnt eyes, same wax-stiff lantern in his hands. He raised one finger, pointed behind Min. Min looked back. The swamp had begun to bubble. A tree was rising, not from roots, but from bones. Lanterns hung from its branches like fruit. Wax dripped from its bark. And beneath it, in a hollow dug deep into the earth, a single fire burned, not wild, not bright,
but ancient, a hearth for the dead.
The villagers said nothing about the night the swamp breathed, but the fields told their own story. When dawn came, smoke clung to the paddies like sorrow. The rice had withered overnight, its stalks tipped black, as if the earth itself had tasted flame. Ming woke on the floor of his room, half covered in dried mud, his hands still clutching the cracked urn that no longer glowed. He did not remember walking home, only the sound of the bell that had silenced the swamp and the boy's finger pointing toward the rising tree of bones. Outside, the air smelled of burnt grass and melted oil. A mist drifted low across the village, carrying with it faint embers that refused to die. And in the distance, someone was ringing the morning bell again. Ming followed the sound. It led him to the cemetery at the edge of the fields, rows of earthen mounds crowned with lanterns that never stopped trembling. The villagers stood in a circle around a single collapsed grave. The soil had sunk inward, revealing a hollow cavity that exhaled smoke. The lantern that should have marked it lay shattered beside the pit. Its flame still burned in the shards, blue and cold. "Whose grave is this?" Ming asked. No one answered. Only an old woman raised a shaking hand and pointed to the wooden marker half buried in the dirt. The name carved there was Pham Nhia. Ming remembered him, a quiet man who had carried water for the temple and smiled without ever showing his teeth. The villagers began to pray. Their voices were brittle, breaking between syllables. One man poured salt into the pit, another threw in lotus petals blackened from old ash. And then, when the bell tolled again, they scattered, like crows startled from a corpse. Ming peered into the grave. At first he saw only darkness. Then, slowly, something moved. A hand, blackened, stiff, emerged from the soil. It was not reaching upward, but outward, as if feeling for something that used to be there. He stumbled back, heart hammering. The hand withdrew, the soil closing over it once more, but the lantern shards flared brighter. In the silence that followed, he could hear a faint hiss, the sound of oil burning where no oil remained. By nightfall, the grave was gone. In its place, the earth was smooth again, too smooth, as though pressed flat by breath. That same night, the dogs began to howl. Ming woke to the sound of footsteps outside his door, soft, deliberate, dragging. He reached for his lamp, but froze when he saw the glow leaking through the cracks of the floorboards, a faint pulsing orange, like a lantern carried by something crawling underneath. He whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" No reply, only the steady thump, drag, moving past his door. The smell of smoke grew stronger. He stepped outside. The village was drenched in fog again, but within the haze moved a single light, slow, flickering, and low to the ground. Ming followed it down the path between the fields, each step sinking deeper into damp soil. The light stopped beside a scarecrow. Its straw head was gone. In its place hung a lantern, blackened, half melted, still burning. And beneath it, standing motionless, was a figure. The man's back was turned, his clothes were scorched, the fabric fused with his skin. When he turned, Ming felt the air leave his lungs. It was Pham Nhia, or what remained of him. His eyes glowed the color of dying fire, his mouth cracked open like a split candle. From within his chest came the faint shimmer of flame, moving with each breath he should not have taken. "You should have stayed asleep," Ming whispered. The creature tilted its head.
the motion slow and brittle. From its lips spilled a trail of wax. When it spoke, its voice was not one, but many, the chorus of every lantern buried with it. Fire does not sleep. It stepped forward, the ground hissed beneath its feet, the grass curling into ash. Ming stumbled backward until his heel caught the edge of a stone marker and sent him sprawling. The urn he carried slipped from his hand and rolled into the mud. The figure knelt, its hands half melted, reached toward the urn as if drawn to it. The crack along its surface glowed faintly again, answering. For a heartbeat, the two lights, the corpse's chest and the urn's mouth, flared in unison. Then, with a sound like breath being sucked from the world, both went dark. When Ming opened his eyes, the figure was gone. Only the smell of smoke and the faint outline of footsteps burned into the soil remained. He picked up the urn. It was cool now, lifeless. Yet when he held it close, he could hear whispers, a river of voices murmuring just beneath the surface. At sunrise, the villagers gathered once more at the fields. Overnight, half the lanterns in the cemetery had gone out. Where each had burned, only black circles of soot remained, shaped like open mouths. The village priest, the same frail man Ming had glimpsed during the procession, spoke to him in a voice dry as incense ash. "It has begun again," the priest said, "the burning return." He led Ming to the temple, a structure that leaned like a tired spine against the hill. Inside, the air was heavy with wax and dust. On the altar sat dozens of extinguished lanterns, each one sealed with string. The priest placed Ming's urn among them. "These are the ones that failed to rest. Their light was never meant to guide. It was meant to feed." "Feed what?" Ming asked. The priest looked toward the distant swamp. Through the temple's open door, the rising mist glowed faintly red. "What waits beneath the lantern tree? What was never meant to burn," he said. A sudden gust swept through the temple, snuffing out every candle. In the darkness, Ming heard the faint hiss of wax melting again. Then the priest's voice, softer now, trembling. "When the dead return burning, the living must choose, drown the flame or join it." Ming stepped outside, the dawn already bleeding into morning. Across the field, the villagers stood motionless, facing the rising sun. Each one held a lantern close to their chest, whispering prayers that sounded more like apologies. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke from the swamp. Somewhere within it, a bell rang once, then twice. Behind Ming, the temple caught fire. The villagers did not run, they bowed, and in the reflection of the flames, every shadow in the village began to move on its own.
The temple burned until morning. No one tried to stop it. The villagers stood in a circle, faces pale and unmoving, as the roof caved in with a sigh, and the lantern sealed within began to scream. It was not sound, but vibration, a shudder that passed through the ground and up into bone. Min felt it inside his teeth, inside his chest, like the echo of someone whispering through stone. When the last beam collapsed, the villagers dispersed in silence, leaving behind only the smell of charred wax and clay. Min remained. He could not walk away from what felt unfinished. Beneath the ash, something still called. By noon, the smoke had thinned enough for him to enter. The floor was slick,
The tiles cracked, and the altar was reduced to blackened rubble. But beneath it, he found something that had not burned. A staircase, narrow and spiraling down into the dark. The air there was cold, older than memory. He descended with a lantern borrowed from the ruins, the flame trembling in rhythm with his heartbeat. The steps ended in a small chamber lined with shelves of clay urns, hundreds of them. Each was marked with a single brushstroke of red paint, the shape of a closed eye. Min brushed his fingers across one urn, and a sound rose in reply, a breath so faint it could have been imagined. He knelt, listening closer. Then the whisper came, not in words, but in rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat trapped in ceramic. He lifted the lid. Inside was ash and something else. Thin strands of black wick, still damp with oil, coiled around what looked like fragments of bone. As he stared, the ash shifted, exhaling a small puff of air that smelled like incense long dead. He dropped the lid. The sound echoed through the room, and for a moment every urn trembled as one. "They're speaking," a voice said behind him. Min spun around. The priest stood at the bottom of the stairs, his robes gray with soot, eyes hollow but calm. "What are they?" Min asked. The old man moved closer, his lantern casting ghostly shapes across the walls. "Not the dead," he said softly. "Not anymore. They are what remains when fire forgets its purpose." He picked up one urn and held it close to his ear. "Long ago," the priest continued, "before the temple was built, our people believed every soul carried a flame. When a person died, their lantern was lit to guide them to the river. But some flames refused to leave. They sunk into the earth, whispering to the clay that held them. The clay remembered, and clay is patient." Min's skin prickled. "You mean the urns are alive?" The priest smiled faintly. "Alive is not the word. Listening, perhaps. Waiting." He set the urn back on the shelf with reverence. "This is why the burial rite was forbidden. The lanterns began to feed on memory. They learned to burn without oil, to live on the sorrow of those who lit them. Each time a villager buried another lantern, the fire beneath the ground grew stronger. It learned their names. It learned to rise." A faint vibration moved through the floor again. The urns hummed like a distant choir. He could hear patterns forming within the noise, voices overlapping and soft waves of grief. He whispered, "They're calling me." The priest nodded, as if expecting it. "You've carried one of their vessels. It knows you now. It wants to finish what was begun." Min clutched the cracked urn in his satchel, his pulse matching its rhythm. "What happens if I destroy it?" The priest hesitated. "You can't destroy what was born from devotion. You can only release it. But release means fire." Min stepped back. "I've seen what your fire does." "Then you know," the priest replied. "It does not stop. It only moves from one hand to another." A soft crack echoed through the chamber. One of the urns on the shelf split down the middle, a thin line of light opening like an eye. From within came a rush of warm air, carrying with it a whisper that finally formed words. He walks again. The priest's lantern flickered. We must go. Before men could move, more urns began to crack. Their lids rolled off, one by one, releasing pale light that floated upward, gathering near the ceiling like smoke forming shapes. Faces appeared, familiar faces, villagers, children, the widow, Fanya, all whispering at once. We burned for them. We still burn. The tree remembers. The priest began to chant, his voice steady but strained. The language was old, its syllables sharp, meant to bind rather than free. The whispers recoiled at first, but then grew louder, angry, pleading. Min ran. He sprinted up the stairs, the echoes following like wind. When he reached the surface, the temple ruins were gone, vanished into mist that shimmered faintly orange. He turned to look back, but the staircase had sealed itself with stone. The priest did not follow. Instead, from the cracks between the rocks, a small flame seeped through and crawled toward Min's shoes, tracing words in soot as it burned. The lantern keeper still waits. The flame vanished, leaving only the smell of clay and grief. That night, Min sat beside the river. The water glowed faintly, reflecting lanterns that drifted downstream. For a moment, it looked beautiful, like stars had decided to return home. But then he noticed something wrong. The lanterns were moving upstream. He whispered to himself, voice trembling, "Fire doesn't float backwards." A soft answer came from behind him. "It does when it remembers." He turned. The boy with the ash-streaked face stood there again, his eyes two pinpoints of dim flame. He held a lantern shaped like a skull, its flame burning cold blue. "They're whispering," Min said. "They always do before the burning begins again." The priest said they're waiting to be released. "No," the boy murmured, "they're waiting to be fed." The lantern in his hands flared once, reflecting across the surface of the river. In that reflection, Min saw movement, figures walking through the water, each holding a lantern against their chest. They were not reflections, they were rising. One by one, the floating lanterns turned over, their flames sinking beneath the surface. And still the whispers rose. "We are the clay. We remember the fire. The tree is ready." The boy began to walk away, his lantern leaving a trail of light that did not fade. "Follow," he said, "before dawn comes. Once the sun rises, they'll no longer whisper, they'll speak." Min followed, his feet heavy with mud, his heart echoing with the pulse of hundreds of trapped souls murmuring through the ground.
The boy never left footprints. Min noticed it first as they crossed the flooded paddies. Each of his own steps squelched into mud, leaving behind heavy prints. But the boy drifted forward without sound, without disturbance, like something not quite touching the world. His lantern cast no shadow. Its flame was dim and blue, the color of breath on glass. And each time it flickered, the ground beneath them pulsed faintly in reply. Min followed anyway. He didn't know why. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper, something ancestral, the way a match knows to burn, the way a wick leans toward the fire. The village receded behind them. Trees leaned in, forming a canopy that swallowed sound. The path narrowed to a thin trail winding between cracked stone tablets, half buried in moss.
Min had never seen this place before, and yet it felt familiar. "Where are you taking me?" Min asked. The boy didn't answer. He only turned his head slightly, revealing the streak of black ash smeared across his cheek like war paint. "You were in the burial field," Min said softly. "You were there when the lantern sank." The boy finally spoke. His voice was hollow, like wind curling inside a jar. "I was the first to burn." Min stopped walking. "What do you mean?" he asked. The boy turned toward him, lantern held out like an offering. "They thought it would be beautiful, a way to keep me close. They tied my lantern to my chest. They lit it as they placed me in the ground. They sang while the soil fell." "And the flame didn't die?" The boy shook his head slowly. "It grew. It fed on the breath I hadn't finished taking, on the tears they cried for me, on the promise they whispered that I would never be forgotten." "And you came back?" "No," the boy said, voice quieter now. "The fire came back. I stayed beneath. It's the flame that walks." Min's mouth went dry. He looked down at the boy's feet, still clean, still untouched by earth. "Then what are you?" he asked. The boy tilted his head. "Memory, clay, smoke." "A ghost?" The boy smiled faintly. "A warning." They reached a clearing. In the center stood a stone pillar, cracked and covered in carvings. Lanterns, flames, and eyes. Dozens of eyes. The boy knelt before it and placed his lantern on the mossy ground. The blue flame pulsed once, then dimmed. "This is where they promised to remember us," he whispered. "But they only remembered the ritual, not the reason." Min stepped closer. The carvings seemed to shift under his gaze, as if reshaping themselves. One showed a group of villagers standing around a grave, each holding a lantern to their own chest, their faces hollow. Another depicted a tree with lanterns instead of fruit, its roots tangled around skulls. "The tree is real?" Min asked. "Yes," the boy said. "It grows where fire was buried and never forgiven." "Forgiven?" The boy looked up at him. "Some deaths are accidents, others are offerings." Min felt a chill run through him. "You killed him." The boy did not answer. He stood slowly, lifted the lantern again. "They gave me to the fire so it would never go out. And when others died, they followed. The fire needed more. It always needs more." "And if no one dies?" "Then the living must burn." That night, Min returned to his room and locked the door. But sleep did not come. The urn on his shelf glowed again, faint and rhythmic, like a pulse. From beneath the floor came the soft, dragging sound once more, and a whisper. "He walks again." Min pressed his ear to the wood. This time the whisper had shape. "You carried me. You followed. Now you must remember." He stumbled back, heart racing. The boy was in the room. He stood by the window, his face half lit, the ash streak darker now, running down his neck like a scar. The lantern he held had changed. It was no longer blue, it was white, bright and slow, like a soul preparing to leave. "You have to tell them," he said. "Tell them what?" "That memory is not mercy, that fire does not forgive, that every time they bury a lantern, they bury their future. He stepped closer. And the tree is full. Men tried to speak, but the room had grown heavy, the air thick with soot and the scent of melted beeswax. "They need another way," he whispered, "or they'll start offering the living again." "What do I do?" men asked, desperate now. "How do I stop it?" The boy raised his lantern and pointed toward the distant hill. Through the window, Min saw it, just barely, rising behind the fog and smoke, a massive shape, gnarled and ancient. The tree. Its branches were covered in hanging lights, some flickering, some dead. From its base flowed a black stream, gloating faintly red as it wound back toward the village. "Burn it?" Min asked. "No," the boy said. "Feed it something it cannot consume." "Like what?" But the boy only smiled, softly, sadly, and vanished. The next morning, Min returned to the pillar. The carvings were still shifting. New ones had appeared. One showed a man holding an urn and walking into the roots of a tree. The tree was not burning. It was weeping. He opened his notebook. His hands were trembling, but his writing was clear. "This isn't about ritual. It's about guilt. The dead return when the living forget why they mourned in the first place. The fire must be remembered, but never fed." He tore out the page and placed it at the base of the stone. Then, for the first time in many nights, he lit a lantern, not for the dead, but for the truth. He held it high, and as the fog shifted, he heard the whisper again, not angry, not hungry, just soft. "You remember." Ming tried to leave. At first light, he packed what little he had left, his notebook, the cracked urn, the dim lantern now cold to the touch, and walked toward the edge of the village. The road he came in on was still there, curving through the fields like a spine, familiar and comforting in its ordinariness. But 5 minutes down the path, it changed. The ground turned soft, too soft. His feet sank with every step until the mud reached his ankles, then his knees. He paused and looked back. The village behind him shimmered faintly in the morning mist, unmoving, unchanged. He turned forward again and froze. The road had vanished. In its place, a line of lanterns floated low to the ground, suspended without string or post. Each one burned not with flame, but with memory. Meng could feel it in his chest, tiny, piercing waves of sorrow radiating outward like the ripples of a cry never uttered aloud. He backed away slowly. The lanterns did not follow. But one began to flicker, and from the flickering came a sound, no louder than a sigh, no clearer than fog moving through leaves. "Ming." He ran. Through the fields, past the shrine, back to the river that ran black beneath the fog. But even the river had changed. Lanterns floated upon it again, but none of them moved. They hovered just above the surface, glowing, waiting. The current had died. The water had stilled. The village had become an island of light and silence, sealed in its own curse. When Ming reached Ong Tun's house, the old man was gone. His bed was empty, his tea still warm. On the wall above the hearth, a lantern hung upside down. Its flame burned green. Ming reached for it. The moment his hand brushed the glass, something inside his head cracked open, a soundless scream, a sudden knowing. He saw the burial rites of generations past, repeated over and over in whispered desperation. Saw the faces of children buried beneath lanterns that burned too long. saw the roots of the lantern tree soaking in flame, splitting as they grew, feeding not from sunlight or soil, but from the promises the villagers broke every time they begged the dead to return. And then he saw his own face, hollow, waxen, floating in the water beneath the tree. He staggered into the temple ruins, gasping, clutching his chest as though the memory had branded itself into his bones. The stone had shifted again. The staircase to the urn chamber was sealed. The air inside the temple had grown thick, pulsing with invisible heat. He cried out, "I want to leave!" But the wind answered for him, curling through the broken rafters like a voice reborn. "Then carry what we could not." That night, the boy returned. He appeared at the edge of Ming's candlelight, barefoot, silent, the ash on his cheek now darker than before. His lantern burned steady white, and his expression was unreadable. "You tried to leave. That is when it chooses." "What does?" The boy pointed toward the swamp. "The tree." "It's alive?" "No, not alive, not dead. It is what the fire became when it was worshipped too long." "And it chooses who dies?" "It chooses who carries the next light." Ming felt it then. Something crawling just beneath his skin, like heat trapped in blood. His reflection in the window swayed slightly, as if delayed by a breath. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because you listened, because you saw, because you wrote it down." "I never asked for this." The boy looked up at him. "No one ever does." The light in the room shifted. Slowly, imperceptibly, shadows began to stretch along the floor, not toward the candlelight, but toward the corners, as if pulled by something unseen. The boy raised his lantern again. "If you want to survive, you must give the fire what it cannot consume." "You said that before. What does that mean?" The boy tilted his head. "The fire eats sorrow, guilt, forgotten prayers, but it cannot burn truth. So I speak the truth? You carry it." "Where?" "To the roots." At midnight, Min walked alone toward the lantern tree. The village did not stop him. The houses stood like graves. The lanterns did not flicker. The fog cleared a path, as if it too understood. He carried the urn, the notebook, and a single candle, lit not with oil, but with a truth he now understood. The tree rose before him like a mountain woven from bone and flame. Its bark was blackened but alive, pulsing with veins of fire. Lanterns hung from every branch, their glass dripping wax like tears. Beneath it, the earth steamed, the roots moved. He stepped closer. The moment his foot touched the soil at the base of the tree, he heard it. Voices, thousands of them. Some whispered, some screamed, others wept. All carried the same plea. "Remember us. Do not light for us what you cannot carry. Do not bury us in guilt." Ming kneeled at the roots. He opened the urn. The ash inside had solidified. It formed a small figure, shaped like a boy, arms folded over a lantern carved from bone. He placed it at the base of the tree. Then he did something no one had done in generations. He blew out his candle. The darkness was instant, and in that darkness, the tree groaned, deep, wounded, not angry, but hollow. The lanterns on its branches began to dim, one by one, and in their place a soft glow rose, not fire, but memory, gentle, unburning. Ming opened his notebook. He wrote in trembling hand, "Do not bury the dead with light. Let them rest in silence. Let them return to soil, not flame. Let grief be a goodbye." He left the page at the base of the tree. Then he turned to leave. The tree did not stop him. But as he walked back into the fog, he looked over his shoulder and saw one lantern still burning, not on a branch, in the roots. It was shaped like his heart.
The old stories never named him. They only called him Ngueju Den, the lantern keeper. But the tree remembered. After the night at the roots, Ming wandered with a quiet clarity, the kind that comes after too much fear, when the mind lets go and only listening remains. He no longer tried to leave. The village didn't ask him to stay. The fog grew thinner in the mornings. Lanterns flickered less violently. Something was shifting, not undone, but softening. That's when the boy returned, one last time. They met beneath the shrine arch, where the path split between the fields and the swamp. The boy's lantern no longer burned. He held it like an empty bowl. "You gave it back," Ming said. The boy nodded. "The tree is still hungry," he said, "but it remembers now, and that makes it slower." "Who started it?" He paused. "You should hear it from the one who lit the first flame." He raised his hand and pointed toward the hill. There, where the forest curled like a fist, sat a forgotten house built from stone and soot-stained wood, older than any other building in the village. Its windows were dark. Its roof caved in at the center. Yet a faint line of smoke still curled from the chimney, as if something inside refused to die. Ming climbed the hill alone. The house was colder than outside. Dust lined every surface. Walls sagged inward. Ropes of blackened wax hung like vines across the beams. And in the center of the room, a single lantern rested on an altar of stone. It was unlike any other he'd seen. Tall, ornate, forged not from clay, but bone-white metal etched with grieving faces. Its flame was weak, nearly dead, yet ancient. Ming felt it before he saw it. A warmth that was not comfort, a sorrow that did not need words. Then a voice spoke from the shadows. "I didn't mean to light it forever." The man who stepped into the light wore robes the color of ash. His beard was white, long, his eyes hollow but knowing. He moved slowly, as if time had bound him like wax. "You're the lantern keeper," Ming whispered. The old man nodded once. "I was." "You're supposed to be dead." "I am." Ming stepped back. "Then what is this?" The old man smiled faintly. "Grief," he said, "preserved, burned into habit." He sat near the lantern, hands folded in his lap. "Her name was Lan, my wife, my breath. She died before the rains one year when the sickness came. It took many, but her death was different. It did not feel like loss. It felt like silence swallowed the sky." Ming said nothing. The man's voice was cracked and brittle, yet steady. "They brought her body to me,
said to light the lantern, let it burn until midnight, then extinguish it with prayer. I lit it. He paused. But I couldn't put it out. Why? The old man looked up, tears glistening in eyes too old to cry. Because I was afraid I'd forget how her face looked in the light. Ming felt the air shift. The flame inside the lantern pulsed once. So I let it burn, he continued. I buried her with it still glowing. I thought maybe it would warm her in the soil. And that's when the fire changed? Ming murmured. No, that's when I changed. He rose and walked to a cabinet, pulling from it a bundle of old papers, sketches, maps, notes scrawled in a frantic hand. At first it was small. Her grave glowed faintly at night. Then whispers. Then other lanterns began to flicker when they passed her resting place, as if drawn to her flame. He handed Ming a page. It showed a lantern buried in soil, roots growing around it like veins. Above it, a tree beginning to form. At the bottom of the page were 4 words. Lanterns never forget heat. They started copying me, the old man whispered. They thought it was a blessing, said the dead were easier to remember when the flame stayed lit. But you knew, Ming said. You saw it. The man nodded. The tree sprouted within 2 seasons. It fed on the lanterns, on the prayers, on the guilt. And once a year, someone disappeared. The offerings. No, the consequences. He turned to face the lantern on the stone. I tried to put it out. I poured water, dirt, oil. Nothing worked. The fire inside her had learned to survive, and what survives spreads. Why didn't you warn them? I did, but they needed the fire more than they feared it. They feared forgetting more than burning. The flame pulsed again. Now I sit with it, my penance, my sentence. I don't eat, I don't sleep. I listen to the flame, to her, to every name it has swallowed. And when the tree chooses, do you hear it? Yes, the lantern keeper said, voice hollow. I feel the roots grow toward their feet. A silence passed between them. Then the man turned. It's nearly your time, isn't it? Ming's breath caught. You felt it, the fire touching your memory, the whispers learning your name. I don't want to carry it. Then write it, write everything, bury it not in flame, but in ink. That's not enough. It's all we have that doesn't burn. Ming left the house before sunset. The sky above the village glowed dull orange, as if fire waited just beyond the horizon. That night he wrote until his fingers cramped. He wrote the story of the boy, the burial rites, the tree, the fire, the sin, and most importantly, the forgetting. At dawn, he walked alone to the base of the lantern tree. The roots shifted to greet him. He placed his notebook there, under a patch of ash, still damp with ash. He did not offer light, only words. The tree did not resist. A single lantern fell from a branch and shattered silently. For a brief moment, the entire tree stopped glowing. And in that hush, Ming finally heard something different. Not a whisper, not a name, but a sigh, relieved.
There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, only full of things unsaid. Min felt it the moment he stepped into the swamp. Not the silence of still water, not the hush of fog at dawn, but a breath held for generations, waiting to exhale. He had followed a path not marked by signs, but by memory. The boy no longer appeared. The widow was gone. The priest had vanished beneath the stones. Only Min remained. The villagers watched from behind shutters, their lanterns dim and trembling. Some prayed, others wept, but none followed him, none dared. They knew where he was going. The swamp no longer looked like water. It looked like glass that had forgotten how to reflect. Lanterns floated here still, but not by chance. Each was tethered by waxy cords, their flames pulsing in rhythm. Min moved between them, careful not to touch, though some leaned toward him as he passed, like flowers leaning toward warmth. He reached the heart of the swamp near dusk, where the roots of the lantern tree bled into the water like veins. There, half submerged in moss and shadow, stood an archway carved from stone and bone. Above it, etched into the blackened lintel, were words in a script Min did not recognize, but he understood them. Where fire cannot climb, it sinks. He ducked beneath the arch and stepped down. The temple beneath the swamp had not been built, it had been grown. Stone and tree intertwined to form a chamber of silence and dripping wax. Every surface shimmered, the air pulsed with heat, not from flame, but from breath, ancient, endless breath. Min moved slowly, his footsteps echoing into the walls like names spoken through water. In the center of the temple was a pool, shallow, still, and filled with bodies. Not decomposed, not buried, but preserved. They floated just beneath the surface, wrapped in linen, their mouths sealed shut with wax plugs, their eyes covered by strips of cloth inked with prayers. Each held a lantern, and each lantern burned without oil. Min knelt beside the pool. His reflection was clear, but it moved a moment after he did. "These are not graves," he whispered to no one. "They're vessels." He leaned closer and saw something else. Beneath the corpses, beneath the waterline, a lattice of roots crisscrossed the temple floor, glowing faintly, like veins beneath skin. They pulsed with every breath Min took, as though synced. He stood. "This is where it feeds." And then the whisper came, not from behind him, from under the water. "You see too much." A figure rose from the pool, soundless, weightless, a man, or what was left of one. His chest was hollowed out, rib bones strung with melted wax like vines across a crumbling altar. His mouth was sealed, but still he spoke. The fire was meant to end here. "What are you?" Min asked, stepping back. The figure raised a lantern. Inside it, a tongue, severed, floated in wax. "I am the words they never let die." Min's throat tightened. "You were a priest," he realized. The figure nodded. "I was the first to try sealing the fire." "This place," Min gestured to the temple. "You built it to trap it?" "No," the figure said, drifting closer. "We built it to listen, but listening turned into worship, and worship turned into hunger." He reached out, and where his hand touched the water, it turned to wax, hardening instantly. "We tried to drown it in silence, but silence too remembers.
Behind the priest, the other bodies began to rise, not to stand, but to float upright, their arms outstretched as though still in ritual. Dozens of them, and they began to hum, low, discordant, like a chant with no beginning or end. Men stumbled back. "Why show me this?" The priest raised the lantern with the severed tongue. "Because your voice is still free, and the fire fears what it cannot silence." And then he offered the lantern to Min. "Take it, carry it to the roots, bury it not with light, but with no word at all. Let this fire end in silence." Min reached out, and the moment his fingers closed around the bone handle, the world cracked. The humming grew louder. The corpses began to sink again, their mouths still sealed, their lanterns extinguishing one by one. And the priest's form dissolved, drifting upward like breath from a snuffed flame. Min surfaced hours later. The night was full, the swamp quiet, the temple gone. In his hands he held the lantern. Its wax had hardened, its light was dead, but it was warm, not from fire, but with something deeper: stillness. He returned to the tree at midnight. The ground trembled beneath him, but he did not fear it now. He knelt and dug with bare hands. Soil gave way easily. At the roots he placed the lantern, not with prayer, not with words, but with silence. The tree groaned, a single branch cracked, then another. One by one, the lanterns hanging above began to fall, softly, like leaves in wind, and each, upon touching the earth, extinguished. Min stood and stepped back. The fire in the roots did not rise. It receded, and the pulse beneath the ground slowed. He turned and walked away, not looking back, not needing to.
It began with a single scream, not of pain, not even of fear, but fury. It came from the village square at twilight, as the final light of day trembled on the edge of night. Min heard it while washing soot from his hands in the river. The sound pierced the stillness like a knife into wax. He looked up and saw smoke, not the gentle breath of incense or hearth fire, but black, choking smoke that billowed in plumes from the center of the village. He ran. The villagers had gathered in a circle around a pyre, tall, crude, trembling with fresh flames, and in it dozens of lanterns, burning, screaming, not audibly, but something in the way they cracked open, glass splitting, wax melting in long threads, flames twisting upward like arms, sounded like voices breaking through their own death. At the edge of the crowd stood a man with a torch. His name was Ba Tuet, one of the oldest in the village. His beard gray, hands trembling, eyes full of something brighter than belief, madness, or perhaps righteousness. "They feed on memory," he shouted. "They burn our sleep. I will end it tonight." Min stepped forward. "You can't burn them. They burned my daughter," the old man roared. "They burned my wife. I buried them, and still they whisper. I cannot forget, and that's the curse." He hurled another lantern into the blaze. It exploded in a burst of blue flame. "If the fire lives on memory, then let it starve in ash." Men tried to stop him. The villagers didn't move. They watched, some with hope, others with dread, as the pile of lanterns cracked and bled fire into the sky. And then the wind changed. It blew inward from every direction toward the pyre. And the flames responded. They stopped rising
and began to pull down into the earth, into the roots. The ground shuddered. The lantern tree at the edge of the swamp groaned so loud it echoed through the valley. Its branches twisted toward the sky like it was trying to claw something above it. From the pyre, sparks flew, not up, but outward, and every lantern still hanging from homes, shrines, trees, flared at once. Min looked up. The sky turned red, not with sunset, but with fire. The lanterns rose. They broke free from rope and hook, floating upward into the sky, like glowing seeds desperate to flee soil. Hundreds, thousands, a storm of light. They hovered overhead, swirling in a spiral above the village, flames whispering, flames watching. Then they fell. It was not fire like wind spreads. It was fire with memory. Each lantern struck where grief had rooted deepest. The shrine caught first. Its stone cracked, as though mourning too long had made it brittle. Then the homes, one by one, their roofs igniting without smoke. The villagers ran, screaming, clutching children, relics, prayers. But fire met them in silence. It did not roar. It did not warn. It remembered. Min shielded his face, backing toward the river. All around him the village became a map of flame, and through it walked Ba Tuet, untouched, his torch now dark, his mouth open in a silent scream, as the flames he summoned refused to consume him. Instead, they clung to his arms, to his chest, to his eyes, lanterns wrapping around him like vines. Men turned to run, but the boy was there, at the river's edge, his lantern dead, his face calm. "It has awakened," the boy said softly. "You buried truth, he burned memory, and fire remembers both." Min looked around. "How do we stop it?" The boy shook his head. "You don't, but you can choose what it leaves behind." "Then I'll stay, help you carry it." The boy blinked. "You already are." He raised his hand, pressed it to Min's chest, and everything went still. The flames stopped falling. The sky, still red, froze in its storm. And from the lantern tree came a sound unlike any Min had heard before. Laughter, but not joyous. The laughter of something ancient, cracked, and tired. The laughter of a curse finally being understood. The lanterns in the sky began to fall again, but this time they fell into the river. Men watched as they struck the water, one by one, hissing and extinguishing. The flames did not leap, the water did not burn. The fire was not fighting, it was leaving. The villagers gathered along the banks in silence, eyes wide, watching the river consume what the pyre could not. And when the last lantern sank beneath the surface, the sky turned black. A true night. No flicker, no light, just silence. And in the center of it, Ba Tuet stood alone, his body still, his eyes empty, his hands burned into the shape of prayer. He whispered one final time, "I thought fire was grief," then collapsed and did not rise. At dawn, the village smoked, not with fire, but with memory smoldering into ash. The tree stood, but bare, every lantern gone. Its branches no longer glowed. Men stood at the edge of the swamp, notebook in hand. The final entry, simple. You cannot destroy memory, but you can choose
not to feed it flame.
By morning, the village was ash and shadow. No flames, no smoke, only scorched rooftops and lantern hooks left empty, swinging slowly in a breeze that carried no sound. The river had swallowed the fire, but the tree still stood. It had not burned, it had not fallen, it had simply stopped glowing. Its branches, once crowned with drifting flames, now drooped like arms gone numb. And yet, something about its silence felt heavier than fire, like a breath being held too long beneath the surface. Min stood before it alone. The villagers remained behind, afraid to follow, afraid that whatever lived within its roots still waited to be fed. But Min could not turn away. He had seen too much. He had written too much. He placed his palm against the bark. It was warm, not alive, but not dead. And beneath it, a pulse. A crack opened beneath his hand, not torn by force, but invited by memory. He stepped forward into the hollow. The air inside was moist and hot, like the inside of a closed mouth. And the walls, they moved. The inner bark was carved with faces, thousands of them, each one pressed from within the wood as if screaming behind flesh. Eyes wide, mouths open, some frozen in sorrow, others in longing. A few smiled, not with joy but with madness. Min moved deeper, his hand trailing across bark that pulsed like skin. Each touch brought a sound, a name, a memory, a moment. Taiju, lantern bearer, drowned beneath the rice field. Be come. Her flame burned through her bones before the ground took her. Ngok Ching gave her daughter's breath to light her husband's path. The deeper he walked, the louder it grew. Each face told its own story, carved not by hands, but by the grief of those who had buried them. He reached a chamber near the tree's base, where the roots spread outward like ribs. In the center sat a stone basin, and in it, a lantern. But not like the others. This one was made of bone and lacquered wood, bound in red thread. Inside, the flame did not flicker. It swirled like a storm sealed behind glass. Min stepped closer. The moment his shadow touched it, the whispers stopped. Then a voice rose from the roots around him. It was not spoken, it was not sound, it was thought, pressed into his mind like a memory that wasn't his. You've carried us far enough. Min fell to his knees. What are you? He whispered. We are what was never mourned properly. What was buried too soon, lit too long. The lantern before him pulsed, casting long red shadows across the chamber. You came to silence us, the voice continued, but silence is not forgetting. Then what do you want? Min asked, trembling. To rest. But rest cannot happen while we are remembered in pain. Then I'll remember you in peace. No, the voice replied gently. You must forget. The chamber shuddered. From the roots, a figure began to rise. Not a ghost, not a corpse, but the boy. He stepped forward, barefoot, his ash-streaked face soft with sorrow. You carried us, he said. "I tried to tell the truth," Min said. The boy reached out and touched Min's forehead. "Then you must bury it now, not in fire, not in ink, but in silence." Min looked at the lantern. "What happens if I take it?" "Then you'll remember everything, and remembering will burn you. And if I leave it, we will fade. The tree will sleep, and you will return to a world that never knew us." Min closed his eyes. He thought of the widow, of the priest, of Bossuet's silent death, of every lantern that had ever burned too long. He opened his hand. The notebook, his only record, lay within. He placed it at the base of the tree. "Let this be your final flame, not for guiding, not for grieving, but for ending." The boy nodded and stepped backward into the roots. The lantern dimmed, and for the first time, the tree breathed out. The faces in the bark softened, their mouths closed, their eyes drifted shut. And from above, the sound of branches settling. No fire, no light, only quiet. Min emerged from the hollow just as the sun rose behind the hills. The villagers waited. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They looked at the tree, now still, and wept. Not with fear, but with relief. Somewhere far in the canopy, a single leaf fell. It did not burn. It simply touched the ground and stayed there.
The village did not celebrate. There were no cheers, no prayers of thanks, no feasts to mark the ending. Only silence. And silence, men learned, was not absence, but reverence. The fire had ended, but not everything that burned had turned to ash. Min wandered the quiet lanes, now cleared of drifting lanterns and the ever-humming fog. The river flowed like it used to, gently, without flicker. The rice fields began to sprout again, their edges still charred but growing, like forgiveness coming slowly through wounded earth. But Min could not rest. He felt it still, a pulse, low, steady, inside him. Not in his heart, but beneath it, as if something had rooted in his shadow, waiting. The boy no longer appeared. The widow's home stood empty. The priest's temple had vanished beneath moss and stone. Yet Min was still here, long after the story had ended. Why? The answer came on a morning thick with dew. An old woman, one he had never seen before, approached him near the fields. Her back was bent, her eyes clouded, but her voice was clear. "You should see your grave before you leave," she said softly. Min blinked. "My what?" "Come." She walked without lantern or cane, barefoot in the mud, as though the land recognized her weight and stepped aside. Men followed, through winding trails he did not know, until they reached a clearing near the edge of the swamp, a place untouched by fire, but heavy with quiet. There, beneath a crooked fig tree, stood a simple wooden marker. No lantern, no offering, just a name, carved in uneven strokes. Nguyen Min, 1991, to question marks. He remembered what we were meant to forget. Men stared. "This isn't real,"
he whispered. But the earth around the grave was not fresh. It was settled, weathered, as if it had been here long before he ever arrived. The old woman knelt beside the grave, brushing away fallen leaves. "We buried a stranger here once, a man who came with words, who wrote too much, listened too closely." "That's not me," men said. "I came just days ago." "Did you?" She turned to him, her eyes suddenly sharp, clear. "Or did the fire call you back?" Men stepped away, shaking his head. "I'm not dead." "No, but you're not alive the way you were." He stumbled backward. The fig tree above groaned in the wind, and from the earth below the marker, something shifted. Not rising, not reaching, just breathing. That night, men stood before the tree one final time. The bark no longer pulsed. The hollow had sealed. But in his chest, that steady throb continued. He lit a lantern one last time, not for the dead, not for the living, but for himself. The light was weak, but warm. He looked into it, expecting to see his reflection. Instead, he saw the boy, inside the flame, his face calm, his eyes closed, as if resting, as if waiting. Min sat at the base of the tree and opened his notebook. Pages had begun to fade, ink washing into pale smudges, like memory surrendering to time. He wrote one final line. "I remember, but I don't belong to the remembering anymore." He closed the book, set it beside the fig tree, and then, slowly, he placed the lantern into the soil at his feet. Its light did not sink. It stayed, burning soft, burning low, not for guidance, not for grief, but as a witness. And as he closed his eyes, he heard it again. Not fire, not chanting, not the cries of the lost, but stillness. The silence that comes before the flame, when breath holds, when memory sleeps, when all that remains is peace. By the 14th night, the fire no longer whispered, not beneath the floorboards, not behind the fog, not in the swamp, not in Min's breath. It had quieted, as if it knew the end was near, as if it had always been waiting for someone to finish the story. The village did not speak of lanterns anymore. The hooks remained empty. No one sang lullabies to the flames. No one buried the dead with oil and light. They buried them in silence, with dirt, with prayer, and with peace. But Min lingered, like an ember left after the wind has passed through. He did not sleep. He walked. At dawn, he sat by the riverbank and watched as fog rolled low across the surface, no longer glowing, no longer dragging lanterns behind it like memories on leashes. At dusk, he sat beneath the fig tree, his name still carved into the grave, and listened to the wind move through the branches as if searching for him. He was neither part of the village nor apart from it. He had become something else, a keeper, but not of fire, of stillness. On the final night, he rose before the moon. There was no voice guiding him, no boy waiting in the dark, no whispers in the bark, only a choice. He walked toward the tree one last time. The hollow had opened again, not as a wound, but as an invitation. And in his hands, Min carried a lantern. Its flame was unlike any before. It did not flicker. It glowed, soft, warm, white, like the breath before speech, like the light behind closed eyelids. This was the lantern the fire had been waiting for, one not born of grief, but from understanding. He stepped into the hollow. The bark no longer moved. The faces carved in the inner walls had faded, their eyes closed, their mouths content. They had been remembered, and then released. At the center of the chamber, where once the cursed lantern had swirled in its prison of bone and glass, now sat only soil, damp, quiet. Min knelt and placed the lantern into the earth. No salt, no chant, no binding thread, only silence. As he covered the flame, the earth did not resist. It accepted, as if even the roots knew this was the one that did not need to burn. Outside, the lantern tree exhaled. Its branches shook, not with violence, but with relief. Leaves fell like ash, soft, weightless. And for the first time in decades, the stars above were visible, not behind the orange smear of oil fire, but clear and cold. Min stepped out of the hollow and looked up. One by one, the villagers emerged from their homes. They gathered, not in fear, but in awe. No one spoke. They didn't need to. They saw it. The tree, shedding its bark, cracking open. From its trunk rose no fire, but light. Not blinding, not roaring, just still. The final lantern buried beneath its roots pulsed once, then went out. At dawn, the tree stood bare. Its branches no longer held anything, and for the first time the villagers began to cut them down, not in fear, but with gratitude. The wood did not bleed wax. It did not scream. It broke like any other tree. Normal. Forgiven. At the base, where the roots curled around a softened mound of earth, someone placed a small stone, unmarked. Min stood beside it. He carried nothing. No notebook, no urn, no flame, only breath, only memory. And he did not write it down, because some endings do not need to be told. They only need to be released. That night, he walked away, down the path he once arrived on. The dirt no longer sunk, the road no longer shifted, the fog no longer glowed. And somewhere behind him, the tree, once a monument to grief, stood in the moonlight like any other tree, silent, rooted, sleeping. As he reached the edge of the valley, he turned one last time. In the distance, a single lantern still flickered, not on a house, not in a hand, but in a window of the sky, a star. And for the first time in a long time, Min smiled. Let that be the last lantern, not buried, not burned, but remembered only long enough to let go.